That feeling of not quite fitting in, even within your own family. It has a name. Marian Rojas Escapé calls it the family scapegoat syndrome, and it affects millions of people who grew up feeling like strangers in their own home. For Emily, that revelation came at age 42, when she finally understood why she'd always felt different from everyone else in her family. Have you ever noticed that when there are problems in your family, somehow, it always ends up being your fault? Or that when you need emotional support, everyone's busy, but when others need it, you're always expected to be available? If you've experienced this, I want you to know something that no one may have told you. You're not crazy, and it's definitely not your fault. In the next few minutes, you're going to discover the 7 most devastating signs that your family turned you into their emotional scapegoat. But more importantly, you're going to understand why. Dysfunctional families need a scapegoat to function, and how you can break free from this toxic role forever. Marian Rojas Escapé has dedicated years to studying these dynamics, and what she discovered could transform your life. Emily always knew something was off in her family, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was, even as a little girl. She noticed how her parents reacted when she had problems, versus when her younger sister, Ashley, had problems. When Ashley cried, she was comforted. When Emily cried, she was scolded for being too sensitive. When Ashley made mistakes, it was chalked up to learning. When Emily made the same mistakes, it was called irresponsible. The first sign that Marian Rojas identifies is devastating. You become the depository of all the negative emotions in the family. Emily realized this when, at 35, her father said to her during an argument, "You've always been the problem child in this family." In that moment, something clicked. She remembered all the times she'd been blamed for fights between her parents, for her mother's bad mood, for her sister's failures. Marian explains that dysfunctional families need what she calls an emotional dumping ground, someone onto whom they can project all their internal dysfunction. The scapegoat becomes the receptacle for all the family toxicity, allowing the rest of the family to feel normal and functional. This dynamic isn't accidental or conscious in most cases. Marian has documented in her studies that families unconsciously choose the scapegoat based on specific characteristics. Usually, it's the most sensitive, the most empathetic, the one with the greatest capacity to absorb emotions without exploding. Paradoxically, it's the emotionally strongest member of the family, which is why they can withstand being the repository of all the toxicity. Emily fit this profile perfectly. From a young age, she had shown an extraordinary sensitivity to the emotions of others. She could tell when her mother was sad, before her mother even realized it herself. She knew when to avoid her father because he was in a bad mood. This ability, which should have been celebrated and nurtured, became a curse, because the family used it to maintain their dysfunctional equilibrium. Marian discovered something even more disturbing. Families develop an immune system against the healing of the scapegoat. When Emily started setting boundaries and changing, her family unconsciously sabotaged her attempts at growth. They ramped up the drama, created artificial crises, intensified the guilt trips. It was as if the family system detected the threat to its toxic homeostasis and activated all its defenses. This family sabotage is systematic and predictable. When Emily started therapy, her mother suddenly developed health problems that required constant attention. When Emily set boundaries about not mediating family conflicts, Ashley started having more frequent emotional crises. It was as if the family had a radar for detecting any movement toward the emotional independence of the scapegoat. The second sign is even more subtle, but equally destructive. Your emotions are constantly invalidated. while the emotions of others are prioritized. Emily vividly remembers the day she came home crying because she'd broken up with her boyfriend of 2 years. Her mother looked at her with annoyance and said, "Don't be so dramatic. There are more important things to worry about." That same day, Ashley came home upset because she didn't like her haircut, and the whole family mobilized to comfort her and find solutions. This systematic invalidation of emotions creates what Marian calls emotional illiteracy. The scapegoat learns that their feelings don't matter, that their pain isn't valid, that their experience doesn't count. They grow up being experts in the emotions of others, but completely disconnected from their own. The third sign breaks your heart. You become the unofficial family therapist from a very young age. Emily was only 12 years old when her mother started telling her about her marital problems with her father. At 14, she was the one mediating fights between her parents. At 16, she was the confidant for all the family dramas. She was never a child. She was a mini adult carrying emotional responsibilities that weren't hers to bear. Marian calls this emotional parentification, a type of subtle but devastating abuse where the child becomes the emotional support for the parents. The child learns that their value lies in their ability to care for others, to solve problems, to keep the peace in the family. Their own childhood is sacrificed on the altar of family dysfunction. But here's the first turning point that changed everything for Emily. Marian Rojas discovered that this dynamic isn't accidental. Toxic families consciously choose a member to be the scapegoat, usually the most sensitive, the most empathetic, the emotionally strongest, because, paradoxically, they need someone who can contain all their toxicity without completely falling apart. The fourth sign is devastating. Your achievements are minimized, while your mistakes are magnified. Emily graduated from college with honors, while working part-time to pay for her studies. The reaction of her family was, it was the least you could do. Ashley passed a course she'd failed 3 times. The reaction, we're so proud. We have to celebrate. This double standard isn't a coincidence. It's a systematic way of keeping the scapegoat in a position of inferiority. Marian explains that the scapegoat must remain small in the family's perception in order for the dynamic to function. If the scapegoat becomes too successful, too strong, too independent, it threatens the entire dysfunctional equilibrium of the family. The fifth sign is perhaps the most cruel. You're blamed for problems you didn't create, and situations that are completely outside of your control. When Emily's parents divorced, somehow it was her fault, for causing additional stress on the family during her college years. When Ashley developed addiction problems, it was Emily's fault, for not being a better example as an older sister. This blame-shifting dynamic creates what Marian Rojas Escapé calls a chronic guilt complex. The family scapegoat develops a tendency to assume responsibility for everything that goes wrong, even when they have absolutely nothing to do with it. They live in a constant state of hypervigilance, always wondering, what did I do wrong now? The sixth sign cuts deep. When you set boundaries, you're labeled as selfish, ungrateful, or troublemaker. Emily remembers the exact moment she decided not to go to a family gathering because she'd had an exhausting week at work. Her mother's response was immediate. You've always been selfish. Your sister would never do this to us. When Ashley canceled family plans, it was because she's going through a difficult time and needs space. Marian Rojas Escapé explains that this backlash to boundaries is evidence that the family needs to keep the scapegoat in their role. Boundaries threaten their function as an emotional dumping ground, so they're attacked aggressively to maintain the status quo. The seventh and final sign is the most revealing. You discover that when you're not present, the family functions worse, not better. Emily realized this when she moved to another city for work. Instead of improving, the family conflicts intensified. Her mother would call her constantly to complain about Ashley, her father to talk about marital problems, Ashley to ask for advice about her life. Without their designated scapegoat present, the family didn't know how to process their own emotions. This was the most painful revelation for Emily. Her family didn't need her for WHO she was, but for the function she served. She was their emotional buffer, their free therapist, their depository for toxicity. Without her, they had to face their own dysfunction. And they didn't know how to do it. Marian Rojas Escapé delved into Emily's family history and uncovered devastating transgenerational patterns. Emily's mother had been the scapegoat in her own family of origin. Her grandmother, an emotionally cold and critical woman, had projected all her personal dissatisfaction onto her daughter. Emily's mother grew up feeling inadequate, responsible for everyone's emotions, carrying guilt that didn't belong to her. When Emily's mother had her own daughters, she unconsciously replicated the pattern. But here's the perversity of the cycle. She chose Emily, not Ashley, to be the scapegoat, because Emily reminded her of herself as a child. Emily's sensitivity activated her mother's unresolved trauma, who had learned to despise those qualities in herself. Ashley, on the other hand, represented what the mother wished she could have been: carefree, pampered, free from emotional responsibilities. Protecting Ashley was, in a way, symbolically protecting her mother's wounded inner child. But this was done at the expense of Emily, who became the receptacle for all the anger, frustration, and unprocessed pain of previous generations. Emily's father had his own story. He had grown up in a family where emotions were seen as weakness. His father, an authoritarian and emotionally absent man, had taught him that men don't cry, and that resolving emotional problems was women's work. When Emily expressed emotional needs, he didn't know how to respond and felt uncomfortable, so he rejected her automatically. This understanding didn't justify her parents' behavior, but it gave Emily a crucial perspective. Her parents weren't evil. They were wounded. They had unconsciously replicated the patterns they had lived, without doing the healing work necessary to break the cycle. Emily realized that she had the power to be the one to break these transgenerational patterns in her family. Marian Rojas Escapé always emphasizes that understanding these patterns doesn't mean excusing harmful behaviors, but understanding the system in order to transform it. Emily learned that she could have compassion for her parents' wounds, while protecting her own emotional sanity. She didn't have to choose between loving her family and loving herself. Marian Rojas Escapé made a discovery that saved Emily's life and can save yours. This dynamic isn't love, it's use. And when you understand this, you can begin to transform your relationship with your family, and more importantly, with yourself. Emily's transformation began when she finally understood that the problem had never been with her. Her family had created a system where they needed a scapegoat to function, and she had been chosen for that role. But she also realized something more powerful. She had the power to step out of that role. Marian Rojas Escapé teaches that the first step to breaking free from the scapegoat role is what she calls disidentification with the function. Emily learned to separate her identity from her family function. She wasn't the troublemaker, the sensitive one, or the responsible one. She was Emily, a whole person with her own needs, desires, and boundaries. The second step was developing what Marian Rojas Escapé calls emotional immunity. Emily learned specific techniques to not absorb her family's emotional toxicity. When her mother tried to project her anxiety onto her, Emily learned to recognize it and consciously return it. I understand you're anxious, but that anxiety doesn't belong to me. The third step was revolutionary. Emily began to set firm and consistent boundaries, without extensive explanations or justifications. When her family tried to drag her into dramas that weren't her responsibility, she simply said, "I'm not going to participate in this," and changed the subject or withdrew from the conversation. The results were immediate and sometimes dramatic. Her family resisted strongly at first. There was blame, emotional manipulation, attempts to return to the previous pattern. But Emily stood firm, and something extraordinary began to happen. For the first time in her life, she felt free, but Emily's work didn't end there. Marian Rojas Escapé taught her something that completely revolutionized her life, the specific protocol to heal the wounds of the scapegoat, and turn that experience into your greatest strength. And I'm going to share that protocol now. The first element of the protocol is what Marian Rojas Escapé calls reconstruction of the personal narrative. Emily learned to rewrite the story of her childhood, not to deny what happened, but to change the meaning she gave it. Instead of seeing herself as the problem child, she started to see herself as the brave one who held a dysfunctional family together. Instead of the oversensitive one, she saw herself as the one who had the courage to feel in a family that had lost the ability to connect emotionally. This shift in perspective isn't about denial or some superficial positive thinking. Marian Rojas Escapé explains that it's a therapeutic recontextualization based on real facts. Emily really had been brave. She really had been strong. She really had developed extraordinary emotional skills. She had just misinterpreted these qualities as flaws. The second element is developing what Marian calls conscious self-parenting. Emily learned to give herself everything she hadn't received in her childhood: unconditional validation, celebration of achievements, comfort in difficult moments, and above all, the feeling of being loved simply for existing. Every morning, Emily implemented self-parenting rituals. She looked at herself in the mirror and said, "Emily, I'm proud of you. You are enough exactly as you are. You deserve unconditional love, starting with your own love." At first, it felt artificial, but Marian explained that it was exactly what her nervous system needed to heal decades of invalidation. The third element of the protocol is revolutionary: developing immunity to family guilt. Emily learned to recognize when her family was trying to activate her old patterns of guilt, and to respond from a place of power instead of reactivity. When her mother said to her, "It hurts me that you're not the same as before," Emily responded, "I understand that change can be difficult for you, but I'm healthier than ever." Marian Rojas Escapé discovered in her research that family scapegoats develop what she calls toxic hyper-responsibility. They feel responsible for everyone's emotions, for family harmony, for solving all the problems. Emily had to learn the difference between healthy responsibility and toxic responsibility, between caring and rescuing. The fourth element was the most challenging. Emily had to learn to tolerate the guilt of not rescuing her family. When Ashley called her crying about her addiction problems, Emily had to resist the automatic impulse to run and fix everything. Instead, she said, "With love, I love you very much. And precisely because I love you, I'm not going to enable you. There are professionals who can help you better than I can." This was the most painful step for Emily, because she had to accept that she couldn't save her family. She had spent her entire life believing that if she were just good enough, useful enough, perfect enough, she could cure the family dysfunction. Accepting her powerlessness to change others was devastating, but also liberating. The fifth element of the protocol is what Marian calls building a chosen family. Emily began to invest her emotional energy in relationships that nurtured her instead of draining her. She developed deep friendships with people who saw and valued her for who she really was, not for the function she fulfilled. For the first time in her life, Emily experienced what it was like to have reciprocal relationships, where she gave and received, in balance. She realized that she had normalized one-way relationships, where she always gave but never received, because that was all she knew from her family. If this content has touched a deep wound in you, if you've recognized your own story and Emily's, YouTube has a feature called Super Thanks. It's a heart with a money symbol just below the video. When you use Super Thanks, you're not only supporting the channel, you're saying that this content has touched something real in you, that these truths need to reach more people who are suffering in silence as family scapegoats. It's not about the monetary value. It's about creating a network of healing for wounded hearts who need to know they are not alone in this struggle. Now I want to share with you the most powerful exercise that Marian Rojas Escapé created specifically for family scapegoats. It's simple, but transformative. For 30 days, every time your family tries to activate your old role, you're going to take a mental pause and ask yourself, does this responsibility really belong to me? Or are they asking me to carry something that isn't mine? If it isn't yours, consciously give it back. Emily practiced this religiously. When her mother called to complain about Ashley, instead of absorbing the anxiety and offering solutions immediately, Emily paused and responded, I understand that you're worried about Ashley. What plan? Do you have to handle this situation? She returned the responsibility to whom it really belonged. The first attempts were uncomfortable and difficult. Emily had been conditioned for decades to automatically absorb the emotions of her family. Her nervous system was programmed to feel anxiety when someone else had a problem. Marian explained that this was the result of years of traumatic training, where Emily had learned that her worth depended on her ability to solve other people's problems. The process of deconditioning took months. Emily had to retrain her nervous system to distinguish between her own emotions and those projected by others. Marian taught her specific breathing and visualization techniques to create what she calls an emotional shield. When Emily felt that she was absorbing other people's emotions, she breathed deeply and imagined a bubble of golden light surrounding her, returning any energy that wasn't hers. Marian also taught Emily the concept of differentiated emotional responsibility. Emily learned to ask, did this emotion arise in me naturally, or am I feeling it because someone else is projecting it onto me? This simple question became a transformative tool that allowed her to reclaim her emotional autonomy. But the deepest work came when Emily began to explore her own relationship with guilt. Marian discovered that Emily had developed what she calls guilt addiction. She felt strangely comfortable feeling guilty because guilt gave her a sense of control. If it was her fault, then she could fix it. Guilt had become a distorted way of feeling power. Letting go of this guilt addiction was terrifying for Emily. It meant accepting that she couldn't control the emotions of others, that she couldn't fix her family, that there were limits to her responsibility. She had to learn to tolerate the discomfort of powerlessness, something that had never been allowed in her family. The second exercise is to create what Marian calls an emotional decontamination ritual. After any interaction with your family of origin, take 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, to practice some mindful breathing. And visualize that any energy that doesn't belong to you is returning to its original owner. Emily, for example, imagined a golden light surrounding her, gently but firmly returning all the emotional toxicity she had, absorbed, like a shield, deflecting negativity. The third exercise is about rewriting your own success story. Emily made a list of all her genuine achievements, not to impress her family, but to reconnect with her own competence and worth. She realized that she had accomplished extraordinary things, despite, not because of, the toxic family dynamic. Think of it like building a skyscraper on shaky foundations. All the more impressive, right? Marian Rojas Escapé always. emphasizes that the family scapegoat often becomes the most emotionally intelligent and resilient person in the whole family. Emily developed empathy skills, conflict resolution skills, and emotional fortitude. That made her a natural leader at work and an extraordinary friend. She turned her pain into superpowers. Emily's complete transformation took about 2 years. But the changes started immediately. Her chronic anxiety decreased significantly. Her romantic relationships improved because she was no longer attracted to people who replicated the toxic family dynamic. Her career flourished because she no longer sabotaged her own successes out of unconscious guilt. And the most beautiful thing of all was that Emily finally felt free to be herself. She no longer had to perform the role of the perfect daughter, the responsible sister, the family mediator. She could simply be Emily, a complete woman, valuable, deserving of love and respect. Think of it like taking off a heavy mask you've worn for years. Today, Emily maintains contact with her family, but from a completely different place. Not from need or obligation, but from conscious choice. She has established clear boundaries about what conversations she will have and which ones she won't, what responsibilities she will assume and which ones are not hers. It's like setting up a force field of self-respect. Marian Rojas Escapé says that this is true freedom, not needing to completely cut off contact with your family, but also not needing their approval to be happy. It's loving from fullness instead of lack, from strength instead of desperation. It's about internal validation, not external approval. If you've made it this far, I want you to know something. Recognizing these patterns is the first step towards your own liberation. You're not crazy. You're not exaggerating. And it's definitely not your fault. Your experience is valid. Your pain is real, and you deserve to heal. Remember what I told you at the beginning. That feeling of not belonging to your own family has a name, and it has a solution. Emily found hers, and you can find yours too. Marian Rojas Escapé always says, you can't change your family of origin, but you can transform your relationship with it. And more importantly, you can create the family you always deserved. And that's exactly what Emily did, and what you can do too. When was the moment you realized you were the family scapegoat? Share your story in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what another person needs to read to begin their own healing process. I read all the comments, and I want to know which of these 7 signs resonated most deeply with you. Your voice matters.